It's December 31st, 1944. 37 B-17s from the Allied 100th Bomb Group USAF are heading towards Hamburg to destroy oil refineries. Flying through a blizzard of deadly flak, they're pounced on by German fighters. In the swarm of battle, two B-17s collide. What happens next is an incredible tale of bravery, expert airmanship, and honor. The sky over northern Germany is the color of old iron, a vast sheet of gray that stretches from horizon to horizon without mercy or variation. Inside the cockpit of the little skipper, Lieutenant Glenn Rojohn can feel the cold seeping through his leather jacket despite the layers of wool beneath, despite the fleece-lined gloves gripping the yoke, despite everything the Army Air Forces issue to keep a man alive at 23,000 feet. His breath comes out in clouds that dissipate against the frosted glass of the windscreen, each exhalation a small ghost that lives and dies in seconds. Beside him, co-pilot William Leek adjusts the throttle settings with the practiced economy of a man who's done this 47 times before, his jaw set in that familiar line of concentration that Rojohn has come to recognize as Leek's way of praying without moving his lips. The formation is tight today, tighter than usual, 37 flying fortresses arranged in their combat box like enormous steel birds migrating toward death. Rojohn can see fools rush in off his right wing, close enough that he can make out the painted nose art, a cartoon sailor chasing a girl who's always just out of reach. Beyond that, tramps, holds position, its pilot, a kid from Ohio whose name Rojohn can never remember, probably gripping his controls with the same white-knuckled intensity that Rojohn feels in his own hands. They've been flying for 2 hours now, 2 hours of engine drone and radio static and the occasional terse command from the group leader, and Hamburg is still 40 minutes ahead, 40 minutes of sky that might as well be an ocean of fire for all the safety it promises. The first burst of flak appears without warning, black flowers blooming in the air ahead, each one a sphere of shrapnel and concussive force that can tear through aluminum like paper. Rojohn feels the aircraft shudder as they enter the field of fire, feels it in his bones before the sound reaches his ears, a hollow whumping that seems to come from inside his chest. The anti-aircraft batteries below are precise today, the Germans have had 4 years to perfect their aim, and the black puffs track the formation like malevolent eyes, always watching, always calculating. Another burst, closer this time, close enough that Rojohn can hear the fragments pinging against the fuselage, a sound like hail on a tin roof, innocuous and deadly. "Flak's heavy," Leek says, his voice crackling through the intercom, and Rojohn almost laughs at the understatement. Heavy doesn't begin to describe it. The sky ahead is a wall of explosions, a curtain of death they're about to fly through because that's what they do, that's what they've always done. In the waist of the aircraft, he knows the gunners are pressed against their stations, watching the black clouds multiply, probably wondering if this is the mission that finally gets them, if this December morning will be their last. Sergeant Edward Woodall Jr. is up in the top turret, his hands on the twin 50s, scanning for fighters that haven't arrived yet but will, they always do. Down in the ball turret, Joe Russo hangs suspended beneath the aircraft like a man in a glass coffin, watching the earth spin slowly below, watching the flak come up to meet them. The radio crackles with the voice of the bombardier in the lead ship. IP in 5 minutes. Bomb bay doors coming open. Rojohn reaches for the switch that will open their own bay doors, his hand moving automatically through a procedure he could perform in his sleep. The doors grind open, and immediately the aircraft becomes less stable, the wind catching in the open belly and making the little skipper want to climb, want to slip sideways, want to do anything except fly straight and level toward a target that every gun in Hamburg is trying to protect. But flying straight and level is exactly what they have to do, because you can't aim bombs from a turning aircraft, and this whole mission, all these men, all these planes, all this fuel and ammunition and prayer, it's all about putting bombs on a refinery that makes the oil that keeps the Third Reich moving. Rojohn corrects the drift, his feet working the rudder pedals with small precise movements, his hands making tiny adjustments to the yoke. Beside him, Leek calls out airspeed and altitude, his voice steady, a metronome in the chaos. They've flown together for 8 months now, ever since Leek arrived at Thorpe Abbot's fresh from flight school, so young he still had acne on his neck. Rojohn had taught him everything: how to trim the aircraft for level flight, how to feather a dead engine, how to count the seconds between flak bursts to predict where the next one would appear. They'd become something more than pilot and co-pilot in those months, something closer to brothers, two men who shared the same fate every time they climbed into this aircraft and pointed it toward Germany. The bombs fall away in a sudden lightness, 12 500-pounders tumbling toward the refinery below, and for a moment Rojohn can almost forget the flak, can almost enjoy the way the little skipper leaps upward like a horse freed from its burden. Almost. Because the moment the bombs are gone, before the bay doors can even close, the sky ahead erupts in a different kind of violence. Not flak this time, but fighters, German fighters, diving out of the sun that they haven't seen in 3 hours, diving with their guns already firing, tracer rounds arcing through the formation like lethal fireworks. Bandits! Bandits 12 o'clock high! The call comes from someone, Rojohn isn't sure who, and then everyone is shouting at once, the intercom a chaos of voices calling out positions and directions, the gunners opening fire with a sound like rolling thunder that shakes the entire aircraft. Rojohn can see them now, Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, the familiar shapes that have haunted his nightmares for months, but there's something else too, something faster, something that doesn't look quite real. Messerschmitt 262s, jet fighters, the future made manifest, tearing through the bomber formation at speeds that seem impossible, their nose cannons flashing with a rate of fire that makes the air itself seem to ignite. One of the jets screams past. The little skipper! So close that Rojohn can see the pilot's helmet, can see the German cross on the fuselage, can smell the kerosene exhaust that trails behind it like a comet's tail. The sound comes after, a tearing shriek that seems to split reality, and then the jet is gone, already lining up on another bomber half a mile away. The conventional fighters are everywhere now, pressing their attacks with a fury that suggests desperation, flying through their own flak to get at the bombers, and Rojohn realizes with a sick certainty that this is going to be bad, that Hamburg is going to exact a price today that might be more than they can afford to pay. Faithful forever is the first to die. Rojohn sees it happen in the crystalline clarity that comes with adrenaline, sees the Focke-Wulf 190 make its run from 11 o'clock, sees the tracers walk across the B-17's nose like stitches on fabric, sees the windscreen explode in a spray of blood and glass. The bomber noses down immediately, too steep, out of control, and Rojohn watches as tiny figures begin to tumble from the stricken aircraft, men jumping into 23,000 feet of freezing air with nothing but a parachute and hope. 1, 2, 3, 4, he counts them as they fall away, white silk blossoming against the gray sky, and then, faithful forever, enters a flat spin, its tail section separating from the fuselage, the whole aircraft coming apart in a lazy pirouette that seems almost graceful until it disappears into the clouds below. The P-51 Mustangs arrive like angels, 6 of them diving down from the high cover, their wings marked with the distinctive invasion stripes that identify them as friendly. They tear into the German fighters with guns blazing, and for a moment the pressure eases, the enemy breaking off to deal with this new threat. Rojohn allows himself a breath, allows himself to think that maybe they'll make it through this, maybe they'll see England again. But the Mustangs can't stay, they're already low on fuel, already pressing the limits of their range, and within minutes they're gone, banking away toward home, leaving the bombers to face what remains of the German fighters alone. 9 Lives is flying ahead and to the left, positioned at the front edge of the combat box, its pilot, a man named Henderson from Alabama, doing exactly what Rojohn is doing, fighting to maintain position while the world tears itself apart around them. Rojohn has flown with Henderson before, knows him as a solid pilot, competent and careful, the kind of man who double-checks everything and trusts nothing to chance. So when 9 Lives begins to drift upward, rising slowly out of position, Rojohn's first thought is that Henderson has spotted something, that he's taking evasive action, that there's a reason for the deviation. But the aircraft continues to climb, climbing through the formation with its engines still running but no visible damage, climbing in a gentle arc that makes no tactical sense at all. 9 Lives, you're out of position. The group leader's voice crackles over the radio, concern edging into his tone. Return to formation. No response. The B-17 continues its climb, now 500 feet above the rest of the group, still flying straight and level but completely alone, separated from the protective guns of the formation. Through his binoculars, Rojohn can see the cockpit windows, can see figures slumped in the seats, and he understands with a cold wash of horror what has happened. Henderson is dead, or dying, and his co-pilot too, both men killed by a burst of gunfire that no one saw, no one reported, a moment of violence so quick and so complete that the rest of the crew might not even know their pilots are gone. The aircraft flies on, trimmed for level flight, the autopilot holding course while dead men slump over the controls, a ghost ship 3 miles above Germany. Rojohn wants to look away, wants to focus on his own survival, his own crew, but he can't stop watching. 9 lives, as it drifts higher, can't stop thinking about the men in the back of that aircraft, the gunners and the navigator and the bombardier, all of them probably trying to raise the pilots on intercom, probably starting to panic as they realize something is terribly wrong. He sees one of the waist gunners climb forward, sees him disappear into the fuselage, probably making his way to the cockpit to check on Henderson, to find whatever nightmare is waiting there. And still the B-17 climbs, its 4 engines pulling it steadily upward, ascending towards some invisible ceiling that only the dead pilots could name. The collision happens in the space between heartbeats, in that fraction of a second where the mind registers something wrong but the body hasn't yet responded. 9 lives, still climbing, drifts back over the formation, its altitude now 800 feet above the little skipper, its trajectory carrying it into the path of the bombers behind. Rojohn sees it all happening, sees it with the awful clarity of a man watching a car accident unfold in slow motion, powerless to stop it. He keys his mic, opens his mouth to shout a warning, but the words die in his throat because it's already too late, already happening, already done. The ghost ship's belly kisses the top of the little skipper, with a sound like the end of the world. It's not a clean impact, not the catastrophic head-on collision that would have vaporized both aircraft instantly. Instead, 9 lives settles onto the little skipper, with an almost gentle finality, the 2 bombers coming together like puzzle pieces that were never meant to fit. The sound is immense, a shrieking of tortured metal that drowns out even the engines, a grinding crash that Rojohn feels through every rivet in the aircraft. The yoke jerks in his hands, the entire aircraft shuddering like a living thing as 30 tons of B-17 comes to rest on top of them, and suddenly the controls are sluggish, wrong, fighting him with a resistance that suggests something fundamental has broken. Jesus Christ! Leek's voice is high, panicked, the first time Rojohn has ever heard him lose his composure. Jesus Christ, we're locked together! Through the windscreen, all Rojohn can see is the belly of 9 lives, close enough to touch, the ball turret hanging just feet above their heads like a malevolent eye. The 2 aircraft are flying as one now, fused together by the impact, either able to separate, their wings overlapping, their fuselages grinding against each other with every shift in the air. It's impossible, it shouldn't be possible, 2 aircraft weighing more than 60 tons combined, locked together, and somehow still flying, still held aloft by engines that should have quit, by wings that should have folded, by a physics that seems to have momentarily forgotten its own rules. Rojohn pulls back on the yoke and feels nothing, pushes forward and gets only the slightest response. They're not flying anymore, not really, they're falling with style, descending in a slow spiral that will eventually meet the ground whether they want it to or not. The altimeter is unwinding, 22,000 feet, 21,000, dropping 300 feet per minute, faster than he can compensate for, faster than any B-17 is designed to descend under control. He looks at Leek, sees his own fear reflected in the co-pilot's eyes, and in that moment they both understand that this is it, this is how it ends, locked together with a ghost ship 3 miles above hostile territory with no way to break free and no way to land. The intercom explodes with voices, everyone talking at once, the crew realizing what has happened and demanding answers that Rojohn doesn't have. Woodall is in the top turret, trapped inside his spherical prison, unable to exit because the hatch is blocked by the belly of 9 lives. His voice comes through the chaos, calm despite everything, the kind of calm that only comes from absolute terror or absolute faith, and Rojohn isn't sure which. "Skipper, I can't get out. The turret won't rotate." "Manual crank." Rojohn snaps back, his mind racing through options, through procedures, through anything that might save his men. "Use the manual crank, get yourself out of there." He can hear Woodall grunting with effort, can imagine the sergeant cranking the turret by hand, turning the mechanism that normally operates with smooth electric precision, forcing it to move through sheer will and muscle. It will take time they might not have, but it's the only option. In the ball turret, Joe Russo is trapped as well, suspended beneath the aircraft in his glass sphere, the manual crank for his position inaccessible because of the way 9 lives sits on top of them. Russo hasn't said anything yet, hasn't called for help, and Rojohn doesn't know if that's because he's injured, unconscious, or simply resigned to his fate. The left wing is burning. Rojohn doesn't know when it started, doesn't remember seeing the fire ignite, but now flames are streaming from number 2 engine, bright orange tongues licking back along the wing, crawling toward the fuel tanks that could turn both aircraft into a fireball. The fire is feeding on hydraulic fluid or oil, something that burns hot and fast, and already he can feel the heat through the cockpit wall, can smell the acrid smoke seeping into the cabin. They have minutes at most before the wing burns through, before the structural integrity fails and the whole assembly comes apart, scattering debris and men across 50 miles of German countryside. "Fire on number 2! Leek is already reaching for the engine controls, already hitting the feathering switch that will shut down the engine and activate the fire suppression system. Carbon dioxide floods the engine nacelle, and for a moment the flames seem to die, seem to shrink back, but then they return, stronger than before, because the fire isn't in the engine, it's in the wing itself, in the places the suppression system can't reach. They're going to burn, Rojohn realizes, going to burn and fall, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. Except maybe there is. If they can stay in the air long enough, if they can keep the 2 aircraft flying together long enough, maybe they can make it to land, to some field or road or anywhere that isn't water, somewhere the crew can bail out, can jump with their parachutes and have a chance, however slim, of survival. The North Sea is still 40 miles away, 40 miles of flying, and beyond that England, home, safety, impossible distances that might as well be on the moon. But to the south, only 15 miles, maybe 20, there's land, solid ground, German land but land nonetheless, and if they can make it that far, if they can coax these broken birds to fly just a little longer, just a little farther, then maybe, just maybe, some of his men will live to see another morning. Rojohn makes the decision without consulting anyone, without taking a vote or considering alternatives, because there is no alternative, and there's no time to debate. He banks the aircraft, or tries to, putting in left rudder and left aileron, feeling the controls respond with agonizing slowness. The 2 B-17s begin to turn, grinding against each other, metal screaming against metal, but they turn, pivoting in the sky like a wounded bird trying to find its way home. The turn costs them altitude, drops them to 19,000 feet, 18,000, the ground growing closer with every second, but it also turns them toward land, toward hope, toward a chance. "We're heading for land," Rojohn announces over the intercom, his voice steady despite the chaos, despite the fire, despite everything. "Everyone check your chutes. When we get low enough, I want everyone out. That's an order." He can hear them responding, can hear the fear and the determination mixing in their voices. These men he's flown with for so long, these boys who became his brothers somewhere over France or Belgium, or in the cold English rain at Thorpe Abbott's. Woodall finally gets his turret rotated, crawls out of the glass dome, and begins making his way aft, checking on the others, making sure everyone is ready to jump. The waist gunners are already clipping on their chutes, already standing by the open door, watching the ground rise up to meet them. In the ball turret, Joe Russo has begun to pray. Rojohn can hear him over the intercom, his voice low and steady, reciting the Hail Mary with a cadence that suggests he's said these words 10,000 times before, every Sunday morning and every mission and every moment when death seemed near. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. The words wash over the crew, over the chaos. A moment of peace in the burning sky, and Rojohn finds himself mouthing along, finds himself remembering his own mother teaching him these words when he was 7 years old, kneeling beside his bed in Ohio, a lifetime ago. The ammunition in the burning wing begins to cook off, rounds detonating in the heat, popping like firecrackers on the 4th of July, each explosion sending a little jolt through the aircraft. Rojohn can see the wing starting to sag, can see the metal glowing red in places, the structure beginning to fail. They have minutes now, not hours, minutes before physics reasserts itself and these two aircraft fall out of the sky like stones. 15,000 feet. 14,000. The descent is accelerating, gravity winning its patient war against lift. Below, on the ground, German anti-aircraft crews watch the spectacle unfold. They've stopped firing, stopped trying to add to the destruction, because what's the point? The two bombers are clearly doomed, clearly falling, and there's no glory in shooting at the dead. One crew chief, a veteran of 3 years on the Eastern Front, lowers his binoculars and shakes his head. "Arm Schwein," he mutters. "Poor bastards." His gunners stand at their stations, watching, waiting, but the order to fire never comes. Even enemies deserve some mercy. At 10,000 feet, Rojohn gives the order. "Bail out. Everyone out now." The crew doesn't hesitate. They've been waiting for this moment, training for it, dreading it, and now that it's here they move with practiced efficiency. The waist gunners go first, stepping out into the slipstream without looking back, their bodies tumbling away from the aircraft before their chutes snap open, white silk blossoming against the gray sky. The navigator goes next, then the bombardier, then Woodall, each man taking his turn at the door, each man choosing the uncertainty of a parachute over the certainty of staying with the aircraft. In the ball turret, Joe Russo continues to pray. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen." He knows he's trapped, knows there's no way out, not with 9 lives sitting on top of the aircraft, not with the turret rotation mechanism jammed. He could panic, could scream for help, could spend his last moments in terror, but instead he prays, his voice steady, his faith absolute. He's 22 years old, from Brooklyn, never been to college, never been west of Pittsburgh before the war, and he's going to die in a ball turret over Germany, but he's not going to die afraid. In the cockpit, Leek looks at Rojohn, and Rojohn looks back, and neither man needs to say what they're both thinking. Someone has to fly this thing, has to keep it in the air long enough for the crew to get clear, has to ride it down until the end. Rojohn jerks his thumb toward the escape hatch. "Get out." Leek shakes his head. "No, sir." "That's an order, Lieutenant." "No, sir," Leek repeats, and there's no fear in his voice now, no hesitation, just certainty. "Someone needs to help with the controls. We do this together or not at all." Rojohn wants to argue, wants to order him again, wants to drag him to the hatch and push him out bodily, but there's no time and maybe Leek is right, maybe they need both of them on the controls to have any chance at all. He nods once, a sharp military acknowledgement, and turns back to the yoke. 8,000 feet. 7,000. The ground is a patchwork of frozen fields and dark forests, close enough now that he can pick out individual trees, individual buildings. This is happening, this is really happening, and there's no waking up from it. The left wing folds at 6,000 feet, the metal finally surrendering to the fire and stress, the entire outboard section peeling away and tumbling into space. The aircraft lurches violently to the left, and both pilots throw their weight against the controls, boots braced against the instrument panel, arms straining with effort. Somehow, impossibly, they arrest the roll, level the wings, keep the bomber and its unwanted passenger flying for a few more seconds, a few more heartbeats. "Rojohn," Leek says, and his voice is quiet, intimate, the voice of a man sharing a confidence. "It's been an honor." "Shut up and fly," Rojohn replies, but there's no heat in it, no anger, just affection and fear and a strange calm that comes from knowing the end is near. The ground is rushing up now, a field of frozen earth that looks hard as concrete, and there's no time for anything else, no time for last words or regrets or goodbyes. Rojohn begins to pray, not the Hail Mary like Russo but the Lord's Prayer, the words tumbling out in a whisper. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Leek joins him, their voices merging in the cramped cockpit, two men praying together as they guide 60 tons of broken aircraft toward the earth. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. The impact, when it comes, is both softer and harder than Rojohn expected. 9 lives hits first, its landing gear collapsed, its belly plowing into the frozen field with a sound like the earth splitting open. The shock travels through both aircraft, slamming Rojohn against his harness with force enough to crack ribs, to snap his head forward against the control column. The little skipper gets a heartbeat later, bouncing, skidding, the tail section shearing away, the fuselage breaking in half just behind the wings. They're sliding now, sliding across the ice and mud, the world spinning in the windscreen, ground and sky and fire all mixing together until Rojohn can't tell which way is up. And then, suddenly, silence. Not total silence, because there are still sounds, the hiss of escaping hydraulic fluid, the groan of settling metal, the crackle of flames that haven't quite died, but the roar of engines is gone, the scream of tortured metal is gone, the chaos is gone. Rojohn hangs in his harness, stunned, unable to process the fact that he's still alive, that the cockpit hasn't disintegrated around him, that he can still move his fingers and feel his toes and draw breath into his lungs. Leek? His voice comes out as a croak, his throat raw from smoke and screaming and prayers. Here. Leek's voice is weak, pained, but present. I'm here. They unfasten their harnesses with shaking hands, drop to the canted floor of the cockpit, stumble toward the escape hatch. Rojohn's legs don't want to work properly, his body in shock, but he forces himself forward, forces himself to move because the aircraft is leaking fuel, and if the fire finds it they'll both die after all, after surviving the impossible, after riding 2 bombers to the ground and living to tell the tale. The hatch opens onto a winter afternoon, cold and gray and beautiful. Rojohn tumbles out, lands in the mud, crawls away from the wreckage on hands and knees like an animal. Behind him, he can hear Leek following, gasping, alive. The 2 aircraft lie in the field like broken toys, 9 lives, on its belly 50 yards away. The little skipper, folded in half, both of them streaming smoke into the gray sky. Rojohn can see bodies moving in the distance, men running toward the crash site, German soldiers probably, come to collect their prizes. He reaches into his pocket for his cigarettes, his hands still shaking, and pulls one out. Gets it to his lips. Fumbles for his lighter. A German soldier appears beside him, young, maybe 19, his face pale with shock at what he's just witnessed. The soldier sees the cigarette, sees the lighter, and his eyes go wide. Kneeing! Kneeing! The German's voice is frantic, panicked. He knocks the cigarette from Rojohn's mouth, kicks dirt over the lighter, pointing at the ground around them. Benzin! Benzin! Rojohn looks down and realizes he's kneeling in a pool of aviation fuel, realizes the German just saved his life, saved both their lives, stopped him from turning the whole field into an inferno. He starts to laugh, can't help it, great heaving sobs of laughter that might also be crying, he can't tell anymore. The German stares at him like he's insane, and maybe he is, maybe surviving something like this drives a man a little bit mad. Leek crawls over, collapses beside him, and together they sit in the mud, covered in soot and blood and fuel, watching German soldiers approach with weapons drawn. They're prisoners now, their war is over, but they're alive, impossibly, miraculously alive. Rojohn thinks of Russo, hopes the ball turret gunner found peace in his last moments, hopes his prayers were answered. He thinks of his crew, of the parachutes he saw opening, of the men who might have made it, who might be running through the German countryside right now, evading capture, heading for neutral territory and freedom. The German soldiers reach them, prod them to their feet with rifle barrels, begin the process of searching them for weapons, for intelligence, for anything that might be useful. One of the soldiers, an older man with sergeant's stripes, looks at the wreckage, looks at Rojohn and Leek, and shakes his head in disbelief. Unmöglich, he says softly. Impossible. Rojohn almost agrees, almost nods. but he's too tired, too broken, too stunned by survival. He lets them lead him away from the crash site, away from the burning metal and the frozen field, away from the grave he should be lying in. Behind him, the little skipper continues to smoke, its nose art still visible on what remains of the fuselage, that jaunty cartoon figure that seemed so cheerful back in England, a lifetime ago. The weeks that follow blur together in Rojohn's memory, a haze of interrogation and prison camps and Red Cross packages and waiting. He learns that 7 of his crew survived, made it to the ground alive, were captured or evaded as fate dictated. Russo died in the crash, as they knew he would, died praying in his ball turret. Henderson and his co-pilot aboard, 9 lives, were already dead before the collision, killed by a burst of 20mm cannon fire that no one saw, no one reported, their bomber flying itself until physics and tragedy brought it together with the little skipper in that impossible embrace. The war ends in May, 5 months after the last mission, and Rojohn goes home to Ohio, to a hero's welcome he doesn't feel he deserves. The Army Air Forces awards him the Distinguished Flying Cross, pins the medal on his chest in a ceremony full of photographers and reporters and politicians who want to shake his hand and hear his story. Rojohn stands at attention, says the right things, accepts the congratulations with grace, but inside he feels hollow, feels like a fraud, because he knows the truth. The truth is that luck, not skill, brought him through that day. The truth is that other men, better men maybe, died while he lived. The truth is that Joe Russo praying in his ball turret showed more courage than anything Rojohn did in that cockpit. The truth is that William Leek, refusing to abandon his pilot, refusing to save himself when he had the chance, deserves the medal more than Rojohn ever will. Years pass. Rojohn goes to college on the GI Bill, becomes an engineer, marries a girl from Cleveland, raises 3 children in a house with a white picket fence and a 2-car garage. He never talks about the war unless asked, never displays his medals, never attends the bomber group reunions where old men drink too much and tell stories that grow larger with each telling. When his children ask him what he did in the war, he tells them he was a pilot, flew missions over Germany, and leaves it at that. But sometimes, on December mornings when the sky is gray and the air is cold, Rojohn stands in his backyard and looks up, and he can see it all again, clear as yesterday. He can see the flak bursting, can see 9 lives settling onto his aircraft like a bird coming to roost, can see the ground rushing up to meet him. He can hear Joe Russo praying, can hear Leek refusing to abandon him, can feel the controls shaking in his hands as he and his co-pilot wrestle 2 broken bombers toward the earth. In 1987, 43 years after the incident, a German aviation historian tracks Rojohn down, wants to interview him about the collision, about what happened that December day. Rojohn agrees reluctantly, sits down with the historian in his living room, answers questions for 3 hours. When the historian asks him how he managed to fly both aircraft, how he kept them in the air after the collision, Rojohn is quiet for a long moment. "I didn't do it alone," he finally says. "Leek was there with me. Every second, every decision, we did it together. If anyone deserves credit, it's him." The historian nods, writes this down, asks more questions about control inputs and airspeed and angle of descent. But Rojohn isn't thinking about the technical details anymore. He's thinking about a young man from Texas who refused to jump, who chose to stay in a burning aircraft with his pilot because loyalty meant something, because brotherhood meant something, because some bonds are stronger than the instinct to survive. William Leek died in 1973, cancer, never smoked a day in his life but got it anyway. Rojohn went to the funeral, stood in the back, didn't speak to the family, didn't want to intrude on their grief. But he stood there, in his good suit, and he saluted when they lowered the casket, and he cried for the first time since the war, because he owed this man his life and he never properly thanked him, never told him what it meant, never said the words that needed saying. The historian publishes his article in an aviation journal, gives it a dramatic title, "The Incredible Mid-Air Collision over Hamburg," fills it with technical speculation and eyewitness accounts and photographs of the wreckage. Aviation enthusiasts read it, marvel at the improbability of it all, debate the physics in online forums and letter columns. Some call it the most remarkable feat of airmanship in World War II, a testament to skill and determination. Others attribute it to luck, to chance, to the random chaos of war. Rojohn, reading the article in his study, a glass of whiskey at his elbow, an old man now, knows the truth lies somewhere in between. It was skill and luck and desperation and prayer and loyalty and sacrifice all mixed together, all happening at once, in those terrible minutes over Germany. It was Joe Russo accepting death with grace. It was Leek refusing to save himself. It was two pilots with their boots against the instrument panel, trying to do the impossible because it was the only option left. And maybe, in the end, that's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, not the presence of skill, but the willingness to try when trying seems hopeless, to fight when fighting seems futile, to stay when staying seems like suicide. Rojohn turns 92 in the spring of 2001. His hands shake now, arthritis in the fingers that once gripped a B-17's yoke, his eyes clouded with cataracts that make it hard to read, hard to watch television, hard to do much of anything except sit in his chair by the window and remember. His children visit on weekends, his grandchildren less often, all of them busy with their own lives, their own wars, their own struggles that seem so important and so trivial all at once. They humor him when he talks about the old days, smile politely when he mentions names they don't recognize, people who died before they were born, in a war that's become history book material, ancient history, as distant as the Civil War seemed to Rojohn when he was young. But to Rojohn, December 31st, 1944 is not ancient history. It's yesterday. It's this morning. It's happening right now, always happening, a moment frozen in time that he carries with him like a photograph in his wallet, faded but never forgotten. He can still feel the yoke in his hands, still smell the smoke and the aviation fuel, still hear Russo's voice reciting the Hail Mary with such certainty, such peace, such absolute faith that death was not the end but a beginning. His daughter finds him one Saturday afternoon, standing in the backyard, looking up at a gray December sky that reminds him of that other December, that other sky. She comes up with a coat, drapes it over his shoulders, worried he'll catch cold. "Dad, what are you doing out here?" Rojohn doesn't answer immediately. He's watching the clouds, watching them move and shift and reform, and for a moment he thinks he can see it, the shape of a B-17 in the clouds, the shape of two B-17s locked together, flying where no aircraft should be able to fly. But then he blinks and it's just clouds again, just water vapor and wind and light. "Remembering," he finally says. His daughter stands beside him, follows his gaze upward, sees only sky. "Remembering what?" "Friends," Rojohn says. "Men who should have come home but didn't." She's heard this before, or versions of it, the vague references to the war, the occasional mention of missions and flak and men who died. She knows about the Distinguished Flying Cross in the box in his closet, knows about the little skipper from the photographs he keeps in his desk drawer, but she's never pressed him for details, never asked him to relive traumas that are better left buried. Now, though, something in his voice makes her ask. "Tell me about them, Dad. Tell me what happened." And so he does. Standing in his backyard in Ohio, with the December wind cold on his face and his daughter beside him, Rojohn tells the story for the first time in years, really tells it, not the sanitized version from the citation or the technical version from the historian's article, but the true version. The version that includes his fear and Russo's prayers and Leek's loyalty, and the smell of burning metal, and the sound of voices fading into static as men jumped from a doomed aircraft into freezing air. He tells her about Henderson, the pilot from Alabama who died without knowing it, his body slumped over the controls while his bomber flew on, a ghost at the helm. He tells her about Woodall, cranking his turret free by hand, muscle and willpower against jammed machinery, fighting for every degree of rotation. He tells her about the German soldier who saved his life, who knocked the cigarette from his mouth and probably didn't get any recognition for it, any medal, just another soldier trying to survive another day of a war that had already gone on too long. His daughter listens without interrupting, and when he finishes, when the words finally run out, and he stands there in the cold with tears on his weathered cheeks, she takes his hand, holds it tight, and doesn't say anything because what is there to say? Thank you seems inadequate. I'm sorry seems wrong. I'm proud of you seems presumptuous. So she just holds his hand and lets him know, without words, that she heard him, that she understands, that his story matters. That night, Rojohn sleeps better than he has in months. He dreams of flying, not the nightmare flying of burning aircraft and flak and collision, but peaceful flying, soaring through clear blue skies with Leek beside him and the crew singing in the back and England green and safe below. In the dream, the little skipper is whole and perfect, her paint fresh, her engines humming in perfect synchronization, and there is no war, no death, no fear, just the pure joy of flight, of being young and alive and free. He wakes in the morning to sunlight streaming through his window, and for a moment he's disoriented, confused, not sure if he's in Ohio or England or Germany. But then memory reasserts itself, places him in time and space, and he lies in bed for a long moment, thinking about that dream, about what it means. Maybe it means he's finally made peace with it all, with the survival and the guilt and the weight of being one of the lucky ones. Or maybe it just means he's an old man whose brain is starting to soften, mixing up past and present, dream and memory. Either way, he's grateful for it. Grateful for one night without the nightmares, without the endless replay of those terrible minutes over Hamburg. Grateful for a glimpse of what might have been, if the war had never happened, if they could have just kept flying forever, young and whole and together. The months pass. Summer comes, hot and humid, and Rojohn spends his days in the air-conditioned living room, reading when his eyes allow it, watching television when they don't, mostly just existing in that quiet way of the very old, conserving energy for the simple act of staying alive. His health declines gradually, then rapidly, then gradually again, the body winding down in fits and starts, holding on because that's what bodies do, they hold on until they can't anymore. In September, he develops pneumonia. The doctors prescribe antibiotics, put him on oxygen, talk about hospitalization, but Rojohn refuses. He's seen enough hospitals, spent enough time lying in beds that aren't his own, breathing air that smells of disinfectant and death. He wants to die at home, if dying is what's coming, wants to spend his last days in the house he built, surrounded by the people he loves, looking out windows that show him familiar trees and familiar streets and a familiar sky. His children take turns staying with him, keeping vigil, making sure he takes his medicine and eats his meals and doesn't try to do anything foolish like take a shower unassisted or walk down the stairs alone. They're good children, devoted children, and he's proud of them in a way he can't quite articulate, proud that they turned out so kind, so caring, so different from the young man he was at their age, full of rage and patriotism and a desperate need to prove something to someone, he was never quite sure who. On a Tuesday evening in late September, when the light coming through the window is gold and slanted and reminds him of autumn afternoons at the airbase, waiting for missions to be announced, Rojohn asks his son to bring him the box from the closet. The distinguished Flying Cross box. His son brings it, sets it on the bed beside him, and Rojohn opens it with trembling fingers, looks at the metal inside, the ribbon still bright after all these years, the bronze star gleaming dully in the lamplight. "I never deserved this," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. His son starts to protest, starts to tell him that of course he deserved it, that he was a hero, that he saved lives and did his duty and came home when so many others didn't. But Rojohn shakes his head, waves the words away. "Leek deserved it," he says. "Russo deserved it. All the men who didn't come home, they deserved it. I was just lucky. Right place, right time, right decisions made by instinct rather than thought. Any pilot in the group could have done what I did, given the same circumstances. But they didn't," his son says gently. "You did." Rojohn looks at the medal again, thinks about the ceremony where they pinned it on his chest, the photographers and the politicians and the whole circus of it. He'd wanted to refuse it, to tell them to give it to Leek, or to Russo's family, or to anyone except him, but you don't refuse a medal, not in the army, not when the war is still going and morale matters and you're being held up as an example of American ingenuity and courage and all the other propaganda they need to keep people buying bonds and building bombers. So he accepted it. Wore it once, for the ceremony, then put it in the box and never looked at it again, until now, until the end, when things that seemed so important at the time have faded and the only thing that remains is the memory of men who are gone, men who deserve to be remembered not as statistics or casualties or bomber crew members but as people. As sons and brothers and friends who laughed and feared and loved and died too young in a sky too cold and too far from home. I want you to have it, Rojohn tells his son. Not because of what it represents, but as a reminder. A reminder that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just staying when you could run. Being there for your friend when he needs you. Doing your job even when you're scared. That's what Leek taught me. That's what I want you to remember. His son takes the medal, nods, and Rojohn can see he doesn't fully understand, not really, how could he? He's never been 3 miles up with a burning aircraft locked to his own, never felt the controls fighting him while death laughs in the back seat, never had to choose between his own survival and his loyalty to another man. But maybe someday he'll understand, maybe someday life will put him in a position where he has to choose, and maybe, if Rojohn is lucky, his son will remember this conversation and make the right choice, the hard choice, the choice that leads away from safety and towards something more important. The pneumonia worsens despite the antibiotics. By Friday, Rojohn is struggling to breathe even with the oxygen, his lungs filled with fluid, his body shutting down one system at a time in the orderly way of dying. The family gathers, calls in siblings from out of state, grandchildren who take time off work or school to say goodbye to a man they know but don't really know, whose history is contained in black and white photographs and vague stories told at Thanksgiving, whose war seems as distant and incomprehensible as the wars of ancient Rome. On Sunday morning, October 7, 2001, Glenn Rojohn opens his eyes and finds himself back in the cockpit of the Little Skipper. Leek is beside him, young again, 23 years old with his whole life ahead of him, grinning that crooked grin that Rojohn remembers from 1,000 missions. The sky beyond the windscreen is blue, impossibly blue, the kind of blue you only see in dreams or memory, and the aircraft is flying smooth and level, her engines humming in perfect 4-part harmony. Thought you might like one more flight, Leek says. Rojohn looks down at his hands and sees them young, unlined, steady on the yoke. He's wearing his flight suit, his oxygen mask hanging loose around his neck, his Mae West buckled tight. Through the windscreen he can see other B-17s flying in formation, their aluminum skins bright in the sun, and he recognizes them. Fools Rush In, and Cramps Tramps, and Faithful Forever, and 9 Lives, all of them whole and flying, their crews visible through the waist windows, waving. Where are we going? Rojohn asks. Home, Leek says simply. Finally going home. And Rojohn understands then, understands with perfect clarity what this is, what's happening, and instead of fear he feels only relief, only gratitude. He's been ready for this for a long time, longer than he realized, ready to leave behind the pain and the guilt and the weight of survival, ready to rejoin the men who went ahead, who've been waiting for him all these years. The formation climbs, climbing into the blue, and Rojohn flies with them, flies with the friends and brothers he lost over Germany and France and all the other places where young men die, and as they climb the blue grows brighter, brighter, until it's not sky anymore but light, pure and clean and warm, and Rojohn feels the yoke goes slack in his hands because he doesn't need to fly anymore, doesn't need to fight or struggle or hold on. He can just be, just exist, just rest. In his bedroom in Ohio, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, Glenn Rojohn takes one last breath and lets it out slowly, peacefully, and the machines beside his bed begin to beep in that final flat tone that signals an ending. His daughter holds his hand, feels it go slack, and she cries because that's what you do when someone you love leaves, even when they're 92 and tired and ready. You still cry because love doesn't care about readiness or age or inevitability. But if she could see what Rojohn sees in that final moment, if she could see him young again and smiling, climbing into an endless sky with Leek and Russo and Henderson and all the others, their bombers whole and perfect and free, she might cry less. She might smile instead. She might understand that some debts take a lifetime to repay, and some reunions are worth waiting for, And some men are lucky enough to die the way they lived, surrounded by brothers, flying one last mission home. The funeral is small, family mostly, a few old men from the bomber group who heard the news and came to pay their respects, standing in their suits that don't quite fit anymore, ties knotted with arthritic fingers, service pins on their lapels. They salute the casket, these old warriors, and they cry unashamedly because they understand what the family doesn't, what no one who wasn't there can understand, that when one of them dies it's not just a man they're losing but a piece of themselves, a connection to a time when they were young and strong and terrified and alive in a way they've never been since. The minister talks about service and sacrifice and duty, uses words like hero and courage and honor, and it's all true but somehow not enough, somehow missing the essential thing that made Glenn Rojohn who he was. Afterward, at the reception, one of the old bomber crew, a waist gunner named McCarthy who flew with Rojohn on 20 missions, tells Rojohn's family the real story, the story behind the Distinguished Flying Cross, the story of two bombers locked together and a pilot who refused to give up and a co-pilot who refused to abandon him. "Your father," McCarthy says, his voice shaking with age and emotion, "saved my life that day. Kept us in the air long enough for me to jump, long enough for most of us to get out. He could have bailed when the collision happened, could have saved himself, but he stayed. Stayed because that's what leaders do. Stayed because we were his boys and he wasn't going to leave us. That's the kind of man he was." And maybe that's the best epitaph, better than the words on his headstone, better than the citations and the medals and the official records. Glenn Rojohn stayed. When he could have run, when every instinct screamed at him to save himself, he stayed. Stayed for his crew, stayed for his co-pilot, stayed because some things matter more than survival, and brotherhood is one of them, and loyalty is another, and love, the fierce protective love of a leader for his men, that's the greatest of all. The years roll on, as they always do, and the world changes in ways that would seem like science fiction to the men who flew B-17s over Germany. The veterans of World War II die off one by one, until there are only a handful left, then a few dozen, then none, the generation that saved the world fading into history, their stories preserved in books and museums and grainy black and white footage that makes them seem impossibly young, impossibly brave, impossibly distant from the comfortable modern world they helped create. But in a house in Ohio, in a box in an attic, there's a distinguished flying cross that still gleams dully in the darkness, and beside it photographs of young men in flight suits, standing in front of a bomber with a cartoon skipper painted on its nose. And sometimes, when the light is right and the December wind blows cold from the north, you can almost hear it, the sound of engines, for right cyclones in perfect synchronization, the sound of a B-17 flying one last mission, climbing into a blue sky that never ends, headed home at last, headed home at last, headed home.